Hello, everybody. Thanks very much, Alexander. So I was here, not on this exact stage, but in DevFest last year, and I talked about large language models. I'm the manager of the team that's responsible for documenting generative AI at Google Cloud. And last year, I spoke on large language models in the middle of November of 2022. So anybody know what happened at the end of November 2022 in the world of large language models? A little event you may have heard of. So ChatGPT came out. So what I'm going to do today is talk about where things were a year ago, summarize some of the major developments over the last year, and then talk about some of the things that are coming up over the next 12 months. So a year ago, looking at the world of large language models, this is something that was a bit of a niche interest. Not that many folks were. Great, thanks very much. Which button is it? That one? Okay, great, thanks. So looking at this a year ago, it was really a niche interest. So there are people who were interested in it who had been using GPT-3 or within Google using Lambda, but it really wasn't something that was general purpose. So looking back to where we were a year ago, I began the presentation with this chart, which showed the history of large language models up to that point. And you'll see here, there actually is a combination of large language models as well as other models that went from text to image or multimodal. And I really struggled at that time. Like, how do I describe this class of models? And luckily for me, the term generative AI came out. And this really encapsulated large language models, text-to-image models, other kinds of models. You can see from this Google Trends chart the popularity of the term generative AI. So this is something that really became established. After sharing this timeline, I reviewed some experiments I'd done with generative AI using GPT-3 to generate Git commands from text, using some other models to translate COBOL to JavaScript, so various experiments like that. And then at the end of the presentation, I asked if there are any questions. And there were actually a number of questions I didn't have very good answers for. And in particular, these three questions. Now, the interesting thing is over the course of the last year, because of developments in this area, there are better answers to these questions than there were a year ago. So for the first one, how do large language models keep current? Over the last year, there's been the externalization, popularization of a couple of ways that large language models, which are trained at a particular time and are expensive and take a long time to train, can be current. One of these approaches is retrieval augmented generation. So this is taking text from a corpus of documents, generating embeddings from that text, and then using those embeddings to direct the large language model to answer questions based on those documents in particular. Another way to keep large language models current is to give them access to external APIs. So here's an example of something where there's actually a better answer than there was a year ago. How to determine whether text was generated by an LLM or by a human was another question that came up last year. And now there are techniques emerging for watermarking. So using a statistical signature in text that's generated by large language models to determine that it's coming from a large language model. There's a caution there. So you may be aware that OpenAI introduced this in the course of 2023 and then retracted it after a few months because it wasn't as reliable as they expected it to be. So there's potential there for identifying text generated by large language models, but it's not rock solid yet. And then the question, people were aware of GitHub Copilot. So it had been out for about a year as of the end of last year. So people were using it as an augmentation, as a tool to help developers do their jobs, to turn text into code, to interpret code. And somebody asked the question, is this going to affect other kinds of professions? And the answer is yes. There are two concrete examples. For legal work, there are a number of different generative AI-based applications to help with legal work. And then in the area that I work in documentation, Swim produces a generative AI-based application for automating parts of that action as well. So the impact of generative AI has moved beyond just the developer world to other kinds of professions as well. So now we've recapped where things stood last year. I'm going to go quickly through what's happened since last November, looking at it in 3 ways. The timeline, that is what's happened month by month since last year, the overall large language model ecosystem. So when I spoke last year, it really was about models, and now it's more about the overall system of how do you mitigate some of the limitations of large language models and how do you efficiently create applications that use large language models. And then finally talk about some of the vendor offerings that are available now. So looking at what's happened last year, the big thing, the big bang, November of 2022, ChatGPT comes out. In February, Google puts out Bard, the consumer chat model. And this is important. I'll talk about it a little bit later, the distinction between consumer and enterprise. In March, GPT-4, which is OpenAI's new flagship model, comes out, along with plugins. So I mentioned before the ability to have an LLM call out to an API. So plugins, that's the framework that OpenAI provides for that. In April, AWS Code Whisper, this had been in preview, became generally available in that context. And then in May, Vertex AI, generative AI comes out, one of the products that my team works on, providing a model garden, so a set of curated models, both Google models, open source models, and third-party models, as well as the ability to use the Google console to interact with the models. And the new Google flagship model came out, Palm 2. In July, Llama 2 came out from Meta. This is important. It's an open source model that is, with a small asterisk, usable in commercial settings. This is a very, very important development. OpenAI came out with Code Interpreter. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. And Anthropic came out with Claude 2, their flagship model, latest flagship model. And then in August, Duet AI. So Duet AI for Workspace, that's for Google Docs, Sheets, Slides, other Google applications. So having generative AI within those applications that GA'd. And Google Cloud, and Duet AI within Google Cloud came out in preview. So providing a way for developers to turn text into code, to get answers about Google Cloud, and to interpret code as well. So one of the big changes in the last year is the emergence of tools that and add-ons could be described as the LLM ecosystem. And this table highlights some of the biggest things. Vector databases, these have been around for a while. This isn't something that's new, but the idea of vector databases being critical in the creation of LLM-based applications did emerge in the course of 2023. And I mentioned retrieval augmented generation. So vector databases, they are the repository that's used to store the snippets of text and the embeddings and to make comparisons to produce grounded responses from the large language models. Encapsulated coding environments. So I mentioned Code Interpreter. It's now called Advanced Data Analysis. So this is within the context of OpenAI's ChatGPT, a sandbox where you can run Python code, and more interestingly, you can upload data sets, upload a CSV file, and get basic analysis done. So this, in some ways, it's automating aspects of the data scientist role, which is really interesting. Plugins and extensions. So the ability to call out to third-party APIs. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. And then development frameworks. This is really big. LangChain. So cobbling together all the pieces that make up a large language model-based application, the data sources, the models, the responses, and making up for some of the limitations that large language models have. LangChain is an open source framework that makes it easy to do that kind of thing, to put together an end-to-end LLM-based application. So now we've looked at the last year in terms of major milestones in the ecosystem. This is just a way to look at it by vendor. So one of the things that's a little bit confusing, people quite often ask, well, is Bard like ChatGPT, and where does Code Whisperer fit into this? This is just trying to lay out the different aspects. So there's the idea of a productivity suite assistance. So Duet AI for Google Workspace and Copilot 365 are two examples of that. So if you're doing word processing, working in a spreadsheet, getting generative AI help for that. Help for developers, Duet AI in Google Cloud, GitHub Copilot are examples of that, turning text into code into explanations. Consumer chat, So Bard's an example of that. And then AI development environment that includes access to large language models and augmented features for creating AI-based applications. So Vertex AI is an example of that. Azure OpenAI and ChatGPT Enterprise is a subset of that as well. And then there are, in addition to the major cloud providers, there are other players, Anthropic, Cohere, and Meta, as I mentioned before. So to wrap up the recap of last year, I want to share a baseline that I've been using. So I've been looking at large language models since 2022 when GPT-3 came out. And one of the things I've used as it's a trivial way to test them is to say, can they navigate the London Underground? Can they get from one station to another? Give me instructions on how to get there. And they were never designed to do this, never designed to solve spatial problems. And what I found is looking at GPT-3, GPT 3.5 when it came out, GPT-4, they got better, but they never really solved the problem. They would be able to get between one line and another, but not really complex strips. So last month, Bard came out with the ability to automatically make calls out to Google applications. And the effect of that is the problem solved. So now if I ask the question, how to get from East Acton to Croxley, these are two obscure stations. You have to go through at least 3 lines to get there. It answers the question correctly. Not by going to its own training, by making a call out to maps. But it does that automatically. So it knows this is the kind of question, should go to maps, answers the question correctly. So after 3 years, the problem is solved. This shows some of the power of the ability of LLMs to call out to APIs, and also the progress that's been made over the last year. Now, I looked at the world of LLMs a year ago, new developments in the last year. I just want to take a few minutes to give my thoughts on some trends that may be important in 2024. So I think we're going to see more multimodal models. So text, image, video together in a single model working together. There'll be continued focus on grounding. So when I talk to customers, one of the things they're most interested in is saying, I want the power of a large language model. I want to answer questions about data behind my firewall, or questions about this specific set of documents. And the maturation of plugins and extensions helps with that, as well as retrieval augmented generation. And then I think there'll be more focus on efficiency and LLM ops. So reducing latency. So that is making the models efficient in terms of providing responses and controlling costs. And part of controlling costs is using the right model for the right application. So not every problem needs the flagship model to solve it. So helping customers come up to tune their application to use a model that's good enough for the application, but it's also cost effective will be important as well. So here's where things looked in February 2023. So we've gone a little bit further than the chart I showed earlier. And I asked the question, will the pace of innovation in 2022 continue in 2023? I think the answer to that is absolutely. So if anything, things have sped up. And the question to ask now is that pace going to continue in 2024? And if I get a chance to come back on this stage again next year, I think I'll have a chance to say, yes, absolutely. It's an exciting area. There's lots happening. No question about that. So please connect with me. And I think we have time for a question or two. Yes. The question is, when will Google Bard be available in Canada? So I just for context, Google Bard is available in over 200 countries right now, and Canada is one of the exceptions. So I don't know the answer to that, but I know both parties are working towards making that possible.
Maybe let's take one more, and then.
Great, thank you.
Okay. Does anyone have one more question? Or yeah, go ahead.
So your question is, do you think Google will ever deploy code that? So the question is, will any company deploy code generated by generative AI without having human eyes on it first? Given the limitations of the models right now, not right now, but who knows where the situation will be in 3 or 4 years.
Yeah, everything has went very fast. So yeah, but thank you so much. Yeah.